Welcome to the Inspire Health Podcast. Your life is about to get a whole lot better. Have you ever felt like you tried everything and yet still couldn't find the answers or the solutions that you were seeking? Whether you're dealing with chronic illness, physical or emotional pain, I want you to know that your body is the most sophisticated machine on planet Earth. Your body holds unfathomable wisdom. Trust in it and learn from it. Know that there are answers and there are solutions to your specific health challenges. And we will be uncovering all of them here on the Inspire Health Podcast. I'm so excited to be a part of your healing journey. Your transformation starts now. Hi everybody, welcome back to the Inspire Health Podcast. Great to have you back. Today's episode I want to talk about something that is so inherently powerful and has such an ability to transform our health, but is so quickly disappearing from our lives. And this is the amount of time that is spent in nature. I know most people are familiar that nature is important and that it has lots of health benefits, but this is something that my family and I have been experimenting with over the last while. We're spending much more time in nature and paying attention to how we feel and how it makes us feel and how it changes how our 2 and our 4-year-old behave and how they interact with each other and how they self-regulate. And I got to tell you that for the most part, this has been pretty astounding. We know that for the most part, we don't need studies to tell us that being in nature makes us feel good. For the most part, when you spend time in nature, you generally switch more. You feel more happy from being fearful. You tend to feel more peaceful than anxious. And you start to feel sensations of being connected more so than withdrawn. And this is just an aspect of what happens in nature. But I've spent a little bit more time looking into this and researching it to look at the effects of how powerful this is. And what I find most interesting is first wanting to understand why, what's actually going on, and how is it making these changes? And what is it about spending time in nature that seems to set us right again? But I think the even bigger question is, why do we still get such little outdoor time in our modern life? I mean, we are used to, from a hunter-gatherer society, I mean, we lived within the nature, right? And then as we started to build civilization, we created more cities and separation from it. And we still try to incorporate aspects of nature within our city. But there is, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, it states that the average North American spends about 93% of their time indoors. So between the hours that are clocked at home, at the office, in the car, collectively, we spend less than half a day out of every week outside. I mean, this is just crazy. And I think it is creating a very large downstream problem of illness. And when we look at Florence Williams, who's the author of the book, The Nature Fix, she says that today's humans seem to be suffering from an epidemic dislocation from the outdoors. So right now, my family and I have been experimenting with this. And where we currently are on Vancouver Island at the moment, we are in an area called Qualicum Beach, and there is this beautiful old-growth forest very close to where we are, called Heritage Forest. And if you're watching the YouTube video, you'll see some pictures I have of my family at this beautiful old-growth forest. They have trees that are over 400 years old. And if you've never experienced that, just being in the presence of this beauty and this, it's almost like this wisdom over the ages that it feels like. But it's just something transformative when you just walk into the forest. You could see it. All of us could feel it. My kids just loved it. I mean, they lit up, and there's something so inherently curious about nature and attractive about nature that they just run around through the trails and they're looking at bugs and they're climbing on tree stumps and just enjoying the whole path. And it's really neat to see the behavior that changes with kids as well as us. And healers from many traditions for long period have everything from Ayurveda in India to traditional Chinese medicine. They have long talked about nature exposure is a form of medicine, and they prescribe it to people regularly. And they look at the elements within nature, so the mountains and the trees and the plants and the flowers and the bodies of water within a natural setting. All of these things are said to be filled with an energy. or a vital force. And that this vital force energy can be transferred from nature to us in order to promote health and to stave off disease and to basically fill us up with energy. Now, in Japan, there's a practice of this that's called forest bathing. And I think this is wonderful. Basically, you go into nature and you are just completely encased within nature. And they'll call this forest bathing. And in Japanese, it's called Shinrin Yoku. And this is actually thought to be an antidote to the overstressed but underengaged brain. And so you get these, and Japanese culture has a very tight and strict work ethic as well. I lived in Japan for a little while, and it can be very strict and intense as far as working. And often they would go into these nature forests or these forest bathing routes that are being created for this purpose in order to just get back to neutral. And so my family and I are spending a little bit more time out through there on a regular basis and down by the water on a little bit more of a basis, just to see how things feel. And it really does make a pretty profound effect on your nervous system. And so when you followed along and you want to see, we're breaking these down as far as the physiological benefits of forest bathing or Shinrin Yoku. And what you'll find in the studies is that in general, across the board, you're seeing people with boosts in energy. You have the ability to strengthen your immune system, particularly something called your natural killer cells improves. You can improve your sleep, and we know how important sleep is. Something definitely happens when you get out in natural light. Now, there's multiple benefits to this. Part of this is getting out in nature. Well, first you're going to get exposed to sunlight. So if there's sun, then you're going to be able to make your own vitamin D if you're not completely drenched in sunscreen and you're allowing sun on your body. That's going to be one benefit that might play into some of the improvements in health. But outside of that, you're getting this fresh air, and you're getting some of the different phytochemicals that are coming off of the plants that also have a lot of different health benefits from us just being exposed to them. But sleep is such a huge thing. If sleep is out of balance, then a lot of stuff goes off for us. So getting exposed to the full spectrum of light, especially early morning light, is very important for actually falling asleep in the evening. It also tends to help us recover faster if we get sick. It reduces our heart rate, it can reduce our blood pressure. It's been shown to lower cortisol levels, so that's our primary stress hormone. And this is one of the main reasons that it's used in Japan, is to keep cortisol levels down, because you have definitely a stressed group of people that are working very, very diligently. And so to be able to go out in nature, this helps to pull the cortisol levels down and help to get people's stress levels back down. And there are some studies that even showed decreased incidence of stroke, and that it will actually increase your lifespan when you spend more time in the forest, when you spend more time near the beach. And what they're even showing is this doesn't have to be extravagant exposure to nature. This can even be simply having more houseplants around and spending time. And I'll talk about what they actually say in just a little bit around that. Now, when we look at your brain on nature, it's always interesting to see what happens. So we know that it lowers feelings of stress. We know that it can lower cortisol levels. It can increase some of those happy hormones that make you feel good. And it's also been shown to decrease the frontal lobe activity that is responsible for rumination. And there's a study I was reading that was looking at two different groups, and they would measure their regular level of morbid rumination. And then they had them exposed to pictures of different scenery. One was more nature, one was more busy streets and traffic and stuff like that. And then after they measured a number of different things, and they were looking at their levels of rumination, and they all found that the groups that were exposed to nature, their rumination substantially went down. And this is something that is huge. I mean, how many people do not ruminate over the things that bother them on a regular basis? And this rumination is then responsible for a cascade of neurotransmitters and hormones that just deplete your immunity, make you feel sick, and really decrease the quality of your life and substantially. So just being able to spend time out in nature that can lower your levels of rumination, that in itself I think is huge. It has been shown to also increase alpha brainwaves. And this is the state that we're trying to get into a lot of times when people are relaxed. They're still fairly alert, but they're relaxed. It can be tied to a meditative state. A lot of times we try to get ourselves down into that alpha brainwave state. When we're in alpha brainwave state, we also tend to connect to things that have more creative insights. And as a consequence, being in nature also increases our creativity. It can protect us against cognitive mental fatigue. Now, this one's a really interesting one. Mental fatigue or cognitive fatigue. This is actually a process that goes on in the brain where you get that mental fatigue. So just think about when you've been on a computer for too long, or you've been working or studying on something and your brain just feels like it needs a complete break, right? I used to feel like this when I would be studying for exams all the time. And what happens is it's not so much what you're reading that's causing the mental fatigue. The mental fatigue predominantly shows up because there is so much work that has to be done to try to stop the distractions, to try to bring ourselves back to focusing on what we're wanting to learn about or what we're wanting to read, and the mental energy that it takes to try to block out all of the distractions and get us back on track and stay focused. And what happens is that when you are in nature, nature is so innately attractive to us that the brain does next to no trying to dampen down other information. It just gets to relax and allow everything in. And so you get this very phenomenal decrease in mental fatigue just by spending time out in nature, which then consequently helps us to focus again, and it improves our cognition. It improves our mood. It can stave off the effects of dementia, and it can decrease anger, tension, and depression, and increases our experiences of happiness. So there's a big host of reasons why it would be beneficial to try and incorporate more nature. And it's interesting, a lot of this is time spent in nature. There's different studies where they'll take two groups and separate them. And sometimes they don't even put them in nature. Sometimes they will just expose them to pictures of nature. And even just pictures of nature will often bring up some of these same experiences and these same physiological effects with people. So I think even having, on your computer, have screensavers that have pictures of nature on them, right? Have pictures of nature around your house. Have house plants wherever you can so that you can bring in those aspects of things into your household. There was a study that they were looking at a while ago. They took two groups and they split them up. And they wanted to see how different environments affected people's life aspirations, which is a really interesting study. And so they took these two groups, and in one group they exposed them to pictures of the man-made cities, and they asked them to visualize themselves fully immersed in that environment. And then the other group they took and they gave them natural surroundings, and they asked them to be visualizing themselves as if they were fully immersed in that environment. And then they took them out and right away asked them a series of questions to see how much they got immersed into the environment and how that changed their life aspirations. And what's really interesting is that the group that was exposed to the city environment, they were focused on extrinsic aspirations. So they were focused on more things like money, fame, image, power. Basically, there was a self-priority, and they were less likely to share resources with others. And the group that was exposed to the environment and immersed in that had the opposite. They actually were more prone to validating internal or intrinsic aspirations. And intrinsic aspirations are things that are related to our basic psychological needs. So they relate to things like community, personal growth, intimacy. And this is the pro-social behaviors that are so valuable to have in our world and allow us to create this feeling of connection and cooperation with one another. I thought that was a really interesting study. And I was watching some YouTube videos by Dr. Wallace J. Nichols. He's a marine biologist, and he does a lot of TEDx talks on nature and the importance of reconnecting with nature. And he talks specifically about that in nature our brains are different and we shift, and that nature brings us deeper into ourselves. It connects us to it and to ourselves and to others. And what we're finding now is that when people are in nature, their oxytocin levels increase. Oxytocin is that hormone that increases naturally when we feel connected with one another, when we give someone a hug, when we feel loved. That hormone actually increases. So when we are in nature, that naturally rises. And when we know that when our internal environment changes, we see our external world from a different lens. He was also saying that nature may actually affect our brains in the same way that our brains light up when we see the faces of the ones we love. So think about when you see the face of your partner, or the face of your children, or the face of your grandchildren, that nature can actually have that same effect. You get that spike in oxytocin. And these cooperative and compassionate behaviors are so pertinent to our survival. They help us bond with others through this increased empathy and a reduced separation between the concepts of self and of other. So if you're in a fight with a loved one or stuck in a miscommunication with a coworker, you might find that a walk through the forest, or a walk through the park, or some time spent around the beach in nature is just what the doctor ordered in order for you to be able to get out of that separation mindset and back into a connection mindset. And from there, everything changes and you're privy to different information that you didn't see prior to that exposure. Now, when we were walking through the forest, what was really neat was they had all of these different signs explaining different things that you were seeing there. And I just found this really, really valuable. It showed, if anybody ever believed that competition was at the core of evolution, just go walk around in nature and understand how cooperation is at the absolute fundamental for evolution of all species. And nature is so profound in its lessons. And so I call this lessons from the forest. And as we were walking around, we come across these different signs that would explain things. So here's a picture of something called the living stump. And it says here, this stump is alive despite having no branches for photosynthesis. It's provided nutrients by intertwined roots of nearby trees of the same species. I mean, how beautiful is that? That basically the other trees around it keep it alive through the root system. Here's another one that's called the stilted roots. So this is, you can see this if you come to the YouTube video, you'll see the picture of it, but it is basically a stump or a log that a tree starts on top and grows around and uses the log as nourishment for itself to actually grow and lay down roots. And so it says the stilted roots, the western hemlock seedlings, are often grow off of a decaying log or stump. And this nurse log or stump provides nutrients, but eventually breaks down completely, leaving an elevated or stilted root form. So if you've ever seen these trees where they are up in the air and you can almost walk through the root system, sometimes they get so big, it's because there was a nurse log there that supported it to be able to thrive and grow. And then another sign that talked about the Beach Creek fish habitat. And fish habitat is sustained by the forest. The overhead canopy provides shading that cools summer waters. Insects drop from above, while fine debris and leaf litter become food for aquatic insects that support small fish. I mean, you just see how this ecosystem is so inherently cooperative. And it's important to remember that nature is medicine, and that this idea is now being reiterated through modern science. So whether it's a walk on the beach or a surf or a stroll through the forest, nature heals us and it fixes what's broken inside of us. It helps to reduce our stress It makes us more creative. It can bring us together with so minimal side effects. So, how much do we need to have an effect? I've seen lots of different ideas around how much we actually need. And I think ultimately it's individual, and it depends on how much else is going on in our lives. I know now that we try on a regular basis to incorporate some nature, even if that's just a walk around the block or a walk to the park to take the kids in the evening. But when we can, we're really trying to immerse ourselves more and more in it and spend less and less time indoors, especially when we can, when it's summertime or spring or fall even, depending on how cold it gets. Spending that time outside and just see what happens. I find right now, right now everybody's been locked down and inside, and I think everybody's going stir crazy. But you can be out in nature very safely. You're not likely going to get any infection by walking around outside, outdoors, in nature. So I implore you to explore that. Kids need to be out in nature. You watch them. Like the other day we were out with our kids. If they're inside and they're on a device all the time, their natural curiosity and imagination is not really being utilized. When we take the kids outside and we walk around, they just find something to do. They find something to be curious about and something interesting. They notice their shadows and will play with their shadows. They will notice different insects and they'll watch them with such awe as they move around. They will jump up and down on the trees and balance themselves as they're walking across stumps. It's pretty amazing to see what happens. And I think everybody requires different amounts of time. But the self-regulatory effects of nature and being outside for kids is really important. What they found is that just being around living greenery like houseplants can even be beneficial. And as short as a 15-minute stroll through a natural area is enough to show measurable biochemical changes. So you will start to see some of these changes in neurotransmitters and hormones just by getting 15 minutes out, right? So researchers have also noted that after just an hour in the wilderness, our brains respond in kind, pumping out happy hormones and neurochemicals that work to reduce blood pressure, tamp down our pain levels, and promote what we call this pro-social behavior. I was reading another expert who was talking about you can have a complete reset by spending about 3 days in nature. So this would be like camping. If you can go out and get camping, go and do camping, or even like my grandparents used to do RVing all the time. They'd be and it wasn't a big deal. They had a small little RV, or they'd pack a tent and they would just go to a natural park for the long weekend and they would spend time out there. Sometimes even if you've got a decent yard, put a tent up in the backyard once in a while. We would do that with the kids and they'd love it. And I think the most important thing to remember is that unlike any medications, the dose curve for outdoor time does not follow a bell curve. So a little bit of nature is a good thing, and even more nature is an even better thing. Thanks so much. Spend some time in nature and see how you feel. Write me an email. Let me know how things go. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.